Hello, my name is Elliott. Welcome to a first episode in a series I'm going to call Elliott Explains Everything, and today we're talking about the French Revolution. The other working title of this series was History as Told by a Messy Gay Who Lives for Drama, because I love history and drama that I'm not involved in, and I feel like learning about history is the epitome of staying in your own lane, because you can speculate all you want on these people, but it's fine because they're all dead. So today we're going to talk about, in the words of my high school history teacher, some sexy history. You guys, there's a lot of war, change, and revolution. And which revolution? Well, I mean, I already said it like 3 times, but the French one, obviously. And if this does well and this is something y'all like, then I'll continue on with like part 2 and part 3, but today we're just talking about the lead up to the French Revolution. The French Revolution is one of my favorite moments in history because it felt like it was one of the only times where the people had the power. It started with the people overthrowing a tyrannical authoritarian regime, and it ended with the people instituting a tyrannical authoritarian regime. So nothing was solved. When and why did the French Revolution begin? There were many conditions, both geopolitically and put in place by former rulers, that were exacerbated by inept management. One of the main culprits is Louis XIV, and I honestly could literally do a whole video on him. He called himself the fucking Sun King because he really thought he was all that in a bag of chips. Maybe in the future I will. But the main thing you need to know about him is that he built the Palace of Versailles. And if you've been to the Palace of Versailles, you know how fucking massive both the palaces and then like the gardens and the grounds around it are. Like, it took 40 years and $3 billion US in today's dollars to construct. Just think about that. Besides that, he was a messy king who lived for drama. I feel like every king has like the biggest ego in the entire world, and they're like, oh, I have to like gain like as much land as possible in order for like my people to like me. But it's not even like for their people, it's just like for their own like penis, so like they can like sleep at night. But basically they're just fucking clout chasers. They want as much clout as possible, and Louis XIV was the fucking prime example of that, because he got into the Franco-Dutch War, the War of Spanish Succession, the War of the League of Augsburgs, the War of Devolutions, and the War of the Reunions. Like, why, like, he just kept getting into wars and like wasn't like doing that well in them. And this was like during France like trying to be like super like colonial, like, oh, like we're like bad bitches, we can like conquer the world. But then just like England was doing better than them, and like every single like colonial city, and they were like, ah. So then that happens, and then after Louis XIV, Louis XV came and just literally made everything worse. So after seeing his daddy not make any large territorial gains, he was like, okay, let me make some large territorial gains. The nobles and everyone were like, hey, what if you just like focus on France's national budget and like our colonies and like other shit, and like not try and like conquer more of Europe. And then he was like red. He got into a war called the War of Austrian Succession, and they got into, the battle was like for like 5 fucking years, and at the end like nothing even changed. At the end of the war, he literally realized he had bankrupted France, and all the nobles fucking like left France because they were like so livid with him. They signed a treaty, treaty de Aix-la-Chapelle. Lived in France for fucking 3 years, and still my accent is shite. In 1748. So then no one in France was happy with the results, and all the nobles were getting mad at him, and then Louis XV got all defensive and was like,
If you had a business that you were passionate about, then you would know what it takes to run a business, but you don't.
So then Louis XV for a couple years like sits down, and then like in 1756 he's like, I know you guys are really mad at me because I got into a super costly war and made no real gains, so what if, hear me out, I got into another super costly war? And the nobles were like, no. And then he was like, because then he got into the 7 Years' War from 1755 to 1762. This war took place across 4 continents. If you heard of like the French and Indian War in school, that's a part of the 7 Years' War. But it also took place in Asia, Africa, and Europe. And then at the end of the war, he literally lost Canada. How do you lose Canada, Louis? So then Louis XVI, after seeing his daddy and grandpa being bad, he decided to be like worse than both of them combined. The one thing I'll say right now about him is that if you're American, he helped America gain independence. So, Louis XVI decided to be worse than Louis XIV and Louis XV combined, but I'll get to that. I feel like in like 5th grade when you learn about US history, everyone's just like, oh, like, France helped us, like, out of the goodness of their hearts. Like, no. Louis XVI wanted to be petty towards England because they just kicked their asses in the 7 Years' War across 4 continents. So then, after they help us with the French Revolution, the nobles and everyone are like, okay, can you, like, chill and just, like, sit here? All you're doing is, like, gallivanting, like, being like, oh my god, like, the Americans, like, yay! So then, all of France is like, okay, well, now that you like helped America, can like you help out your own country? And then he's like, what problems are there?
Oh, that's not so much. So?
So quick little economics lesson. The Gini coefficient is like the measure of wealth inequality in like economics or whatever. 0 is perfect inequality and 1 is complete inequality. You want to be as close to 0 as possible, but then like not 0 because 0 is like literally communism. The wealth inequality in America today and the wealth inequality in the French Revolution are this and this. So not that far apart, hashtag round 2. So besides just huge wealth inequality, there's also a huge crop failure like the past summer, but then also like the 20 summers before that. Basically all you need to know is that for like the past 2 decades, harvesting crops was much harder because like a lot of the crops were dying, so bread prices were skyrocketing because there was economics again. There was a large demand for a limited supply, so bread prices were skyrocketing, so then like bitches were starving. Also, France at the time was known as the China of Europe because it had a huge population. The population went from 18 million in 1700 to 26 million in 1789, which may not sound big like in today's day, but in 18th century that was like a lot. So France also had no money from all the aforementioned wars, and most recently Louis XVI being petty via the American Revolution. Also, in that time, France was in the age of the Enlightenment, but it wasn't just the Enlightenment with like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. The philosophical debates were like open more to the general public because more people were learning. There was like increased literacy and shit. So the general populace more and more were like, fuck the king. Like, do we even need a king? Like, was the king even set up by God? And like, is God real? You know, casual Tuesday afternoon conversation. But then also like, even with the whole like American Revolution thing, it's like the American Revolution was fighting for like liberty and justice for all. So then the French peasants were like, if you just helped America get liberty and justice for all, can we have liberty and justice for all? And then Louis XVI was like, no, like BLM. Or I guess it's like PLM. Unrest is building and money and food is dwindling. So Louis XVI tweets out, "At the poor, I've heard your guys' concerns and you're all starving and poor, but the state has no money, so we're actually gonna have to tax you more." And the poor tweet back, "Can you tax the clergy and the nobility? Because you're basically taxing them next to nothing these days, and like they have all the money and we have no money." Then Louis XVI tweets back, "No." And unsurprisingly, things didn't get better. And Louis XVI is like, well, fuck, like this is just so hard because we're taxing the poor, but like they don't have any money, so we can't get any taxes from them. What are we gonna do? So he calls the Estates General for the first time in over 150 years with members from the first, second, and third estate, which I'll explain in a second, solve like France's financial crisis essentially. So the Estates General had 3 estates. The first estate was the clergy, comprising of 1% of the population, and they got 1 vote in the Estates General. The nobles, the second estate, comprising about 2% of the population, and they got 1 vote. The third estate, comprising 97% of the population, had 1 vote. They debated for like 6 weeks, but the debating really just came down to the third estate being like, let's tax the clergy and the nobility, and the clergy and the nobility are like, no. And then since they have 2 votes and the third estate only has 1 vote, they kept winning. So then after 6 weeks of debating and shit, the third estate is like, okay, you're literally not listening to us. You guys obviously aren't gonna tax. People are dying, and you guys like don't give a fuck. Like all you've done is just like
with me for too long. I'm not gonna hear it anymore.
So then, because they decide to not hear it anymore, they decide to make their own little thing called the National Assembly on June 17th, 1789. And basically, they decided, we're not gonna like leave or like disassemble until we solve France's financial crisis because y'all aren't fucking doing anything. They're like deciding to like become the National Assembly and shit. So then they go to lunch and then they come back and then Louis XVI is like, I locked the door, so what the fuck y'all gonna do? Like, checkmate, bitch. And then they are like, and then they like walk 4 steps and get onto a tennis court and then declare themselves a National Assembly on a tennis court, and then that's called the tennis court oath. And then he's like, in the tennis court oath, basically they declared they were not going to disassemble until France had a new constitution. So then everyone finds out that this happened, and then they're like, oh my god, wait, like the people like might get like some sort of power, like this is like wild, like tea. So they start getting hope. And remember how in the Hunger Games, President Snow is all like,
Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear.
So, just like how hope is the only thing stronger than fear, the only thing that can spread quicker than a virus is a rumor, and there was a rumor that Louis XVI was going to call in the Swiss National Guard, and not even the French National Guard, because the French National Guard was like on the people's side, to basically like quell the rebellion. Basically, they were expecting the Swiss National Guard to like launch a coup and basically put everything back to like the restored order, but then the people were like,
if you keep seeing that everyone keeps taking advantage of you, sometimes you gotta just let a bitch know and remind them who the you are, so they're too afraid to take advantage of you.
The bitch in this sentence is clearly Louis XVI, and the way they were going to let this bitch know was they were going to go into a political prison known as La Bastille to free all these prisoners, because they're like, oh, if you guys are like prisoners of the monarchy and enemies of the monarchy, that means you guys are like the face of the revolution. So they're like, okay, let's go into the Bastille, let's free all these prisoners, and also if the Swiss National Guard is coming, we gotta like stay strapped, and the Bastille had a bunch of fucking weapons. So then they storm the Bastille and they're all like, and then all the prisoners are like, Everyone who stormed the Bastille thought there were like hundreds of prisoners in there. There were literally 7. And this is known as the beginning of the French Revolution. And this day is known as Bastille Day, and it was on July 14th, 1789, and it's still celebrated in France every year. It's their Fête Nationale. It's like 4th of July in America, September 7th in Brazil. I love how like in America and Brazil, it's like celebrating independence from like the tyrannical like English and like Portuguese like monarchies. And I love how in France they're like celebrating their independence like from themselves. So Bastille Day got the ball rolling, so to speak, because on August 4th, the National Assembly, they signed a law abolishing feudalism, which had been in place in France since the 11th century. Think about that. The 11th century to 1789 is over twice the time that America has like been a country. We've caused so much drama in our shortened history that I think it seems like we've been around for so much longer. But the way society had been structured for literally like 6 centuries was no more. That's like insane. So then 2 weeks later, after they abolished feudalism, with the help of Thomas Jefferson, they wrote something called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, which really echoed a lot of the same like ideals as the Declaration of Independence said in America, which shows that like these bitches aren't even fucking original, because like we had our own revolution and then they just wanted to fucking steal our thunder 13 years later. Like, what the fuck, France? That was a joke. That was a complete joke, France. We wouldn't be a country without you guys today, so thanks. So yeah, that's it on like the build up for the French Revolution, and if you guys like this, I will do part 2 and part 3 and maybe even part 4, because like a lot of shit happens, because that literally was just the lead up. Like it just gets so much more interesting from there.